Good evening, members, and welcome to this evening session of the BCP Overview and Scrutiny Board. For members of the public who might be watching online, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Councillor Steve Bartlett, and I'm the Chairman of the Overview and Scrutiny Board. So, good evening to you. I'd just like to hand over to Claire, who will now read us a bit of housekeeping information about the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Please note the meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Board is being recorded by the Council for live and will be published on the Council's website for a minimum of 6 months. The meeting may also be recorded or streamed for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public. Please could everyone present follow these ground rules for speaking. Only speak when invited to do so by the Chairman. If accessing via Teams, always turn on your video function when invited to speak and state your name. Please use your microphone when speaking and please mute or turn off your microphone when you are not talking. If accessing via Teams would like to speak on an item, please do so by utilising the raise your hand feature in the bar at the top of the Teams window. Please refrain from using the chat function in Teams except for the purpose of recording a motion. If a vote is required on any issue, this shall be done by a show of hands. And finally, please could everyone ensure that background noise is kept to a minimum and all devices are turned off or switched to a silent setting for the duration of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. Do we have any apologies for this evening's meeting?
Yes, Chairman, I've received apologies. Sorry, I've received apologies for this meeting from Councillor Farr, Councillor Kelsey, Councillor Rigby, Councillor O'Neill and Councillor Dion, and also Councillor Allison.
Thank you. And do we have any substitute members this evening?
Yes, we've got Councillor Simon Ball substituted for Councillor Chris Rigby.
Thank you. Welcome, Councillor. Thank you. Members, do you have any declarations of interest regarding any items on the agenda this evening? It would be an opt. Thank you.
There's been no public issues received for this meeting, Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you. So we come to agenda item 5, which is the project management expansion of the Longsby Special School at the former Bournemouth Learning Centre. This item came to overview and scrutiny back on the 15th of June 2020 with a project budget of 500k. And this was subsequently approved at full council on the 7th of July 2020. A second paper was introduced as a supplementary agenda at the Cabinet meeting held on the 14th of 2021, and that requested a revised budget of 1,250,000, which additionally asked the Chief Executive to authorise the additional expenditure under emergency powers. This was only very shortly before the school was actually due to open, albeit for just a small section of the school, a limited number of students. Because the paper was not, it wasn't available for overview and scrutiny because of the speed at which it came to Cabinet, it was agreed that the overview and scrutiny would be carried out by the Children's Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and the paper was presented to that committee on the 8th of June 2021. But what it didn't actually do was present the report that was originally approved by the Council and the Chief Executive. And therefore, it was decided that in order that that paper be scrutinised, it be brought back before this committee. And today is the first opportunity that we've had to do that. So that's the background to the paper. I'd like to ask Councillor Nicola Green if she wouldn't mind just introducing that paper to us, and then we can take it from there. Thank you, Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chairman, and good evening, members. Bearing in mind some of the work that's gone on with this project, Chairman, I'm very happy always to talk about the programme itself, the project at the BL. but I know that the particular interest of this panel is around the if you like, the decision making, the governance that went into it, and the programme management. So speak more extensively about the project. Would it be helpful if I started in those places and then answer any questions in more detail as they come up? And members, so you're aware, Terry Reynolds is also in the meeting, and he's been providing some support most recently. So between us, hopefully we can answer your questions. But would that be an acceptable way to start, Chairman?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, so in terms of the decision itself and why it was that the not very common device of the Chief Executive making the decision, how that came about, was really one of timing. Correct if I may, Chairman. Sorry, this sounds impertinent, but the original the original decision last year was a cabinet decision. It was not a council one. So it was taken by cabinet appropriately under their delegated powers, and it was reported to that council on the 7th of July. Clearly, by then the second paper came around, it took the whole project well into the threshold where a council decision would have been required, and because of the timing issues, that wasn't possible, and that's why the Chief Executive took that decision. So just to give you a brief overview, sorry, Chairman.
Sorry,
Really sorry.
Unfortunately, you've frozen, Councillor Green, so you might have to go back a couple of sentences.
Timing, and I'm really going to try. The project really got underway after the obviously was vacated in the autumn, late autumn of last year, and it became clear through the early months of this year that there was insufficient funding set out in the project to deliver what was actually required. There was also something which hadn't been fully. I think it was a subsequent decision to the June cabinet paper to get some children in there much sooner and immediately after Easter. So that brought the requirement for the project forward, but it was very clear that with COVID pressures, with additional requirements, with additional young people, and based on the actual condition of the building, that the additional funding was required. So the decision was required really by the end of March. I've been aware that Easter was very early this year, so very beginning of April, and the children needed to start afterwards. So it became clear that because of dates of the council which had been set up, there would not be time to go through the more usual process of taking a paper to cabinet, those recommendations going on to full council, and the decision being taken at that point. So we'd had a council, I think, on the 23rd of March, and while there was a council full meeting on the 11th of May, it was the annual council, so no further business. Available council meeting was the 2nd of June, which simply didn't give the time for that to be for the decision to be taken in time to progress the project. So there were two options there, which was to publish an officer decision record and just put all the information in there, or the decision that we took was noting the circumstances, actually to commission a cabinet review that was set out before members in the more normal way. With the information that you would expect to find. So the decision was take it to cabinet or don't, but the final decision had to be taken by the Chief Executive under those delegated powers. So that was the reason for that. In terms of the programme, when we picked this project up, and for reasons which others will be able to comment on more than I can, and possibly as a legacy of LGR, there wasn't a clear programme management management in place within children's services. And I think that the original decision perhaps didn't have the accountability that we would expect now. And what I can do is assure members that that is now in place. And if I can just very quickly run through this so that you're aware of what that looks like. Clearly, any individual project it'll have its own team, it'll have an officer leading on it, partners, existing school site or whatever. Those individual projects now feed into the newly set up Children's Services Capital Project, which Mr Reynolds has been chairing until recently when the Director of Education, Sarah Rempel, arrived. She chaired the last meeting, and I'm on that programme board. As I say, the Director of Education, our education consultant, we have support from capital finance officers, an officer in the finance department, as well as support from the programme team itself. That board we're currently meeting for fortnightly to make sure that we've got everything in place that we need to, and I think we're on our third or fourth meeting. That programme board feeds into the High Needs Block Recovery Board. I think I spoke about this at the Cabinet. That hadn't been set up at the time, but this is a board which members may be aware of, and it is chaired by the Chief Executive. And its remit is to look at well-known issues within the high needs block of the Dedicated Schools Grant. And so the Children's Services Capital Programme seems a logical way for that to have line of sight to projects, whether they're delivering what they're meant to be doing, whether they're delivering to budget, and really to go into the detail, making sure that they're providing the right school places. So that board, as I say, which is chaired by the Chief Executive, it has the Leader of the Council, it has the Section 151 Officer, the Director of Children's Services, myself as portfolio holders, and very significantly the Chair of the Schools Forum, who he sits on that board as well and pulls in other information. That board meets 6 weekly. And that will be reporting now through the quarterly NTFP updates, which will go to Cabinet and then on to full council. So there will now be that clear line of sight. There is now that clear line of sight from the individual projects through to council, and I think that will give far greater accountability and clarity about what's happening. I can answer any questions, Chairman, that you'd like me to, but I just thought by way of an introduction, I was hoping that was where you'd want me to go.
So I didn't quite catch the last bit, Councillor Green, but I think you're inviting questions now.
That would be impertinent for me to do that, Chairman. I think that's your role, but clearly
Yeah,
I'd be very happy to answer anything I can.
Okay, thank you. So, members. Councillor Howe.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Yeah, this looks very worthy, but I just wonder about costs. That understands that costs are increasing at a rate of 25% in terms of, that's an estimate from BBML, I think, in terms of getting projects done at the moment due to increased contractors' fees and supplies. I just wondered if that's been factored into this budget. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, that is reported in the April Cabinet paper. The team are already on site, and our update as of 10 days ago is that things are running to cost as we would expect. There has been a small call on the contingency, but that's everything goes through a sign off there, but we think those costs ought to be covered. That is our best advice at the moment.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members? Okay, in that case, Councillor Gabriel.
No, it's just a comment, just to say, it's great to see us taking forward a project, this big so quickly. I know we had some concerns about the overspend, but actually the ongoing savings for all the pupil costs is going to make it, much more viably attractive for the council and all these kids that are going to benefit from the facilities. It's such a good project. It's great it's happening so quickly. So yeah, well done to everybody.
Yeah.
Some happy children, some safe children. That's what we need to do.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else? Otherwise, I'll lead on. Okay, thank you. I'm absolutely delighted to hear. Okay, Councillor Hedges, I'll bring you back in a moment, if that's all right. Yeah, I'm actually delighted to hear that the project management infrastructure has now been put in place. The issue that we had was one of the way the project management was carried out initially. And let's face it, if you have any project that's agreed with a budget of 500k, and then 2 weeks before the project starts to deliver its output, the costs are suddenly announced to being 150% more than they were as approved by the council in the first instance. It obviously raises a few questions about, was the budget right in the first place? Has it been monitored? You know, are people getting value for money? All of those things. Now, because I had some concerns about that, and so did the Children's Services Overview and Scrutiny, to be fair, I was managed, luckily enough, to go and visit the school and have a look round to see what money was being spent on. And I have to say that, you know, it's going to be an absolutely fantastic facility. I draw no, you know, without a doubt, it is going to be a credit to this council. And I also believe that it's incredibly good value for money. And so the issue is not so much about the value for money aspects. For me, it's more about how during a fairly substantive project, the council are suddenly confronted with something that it doesn't appear quite right, and it's a bit of a shock. And when you're running projects, you think, well, actually, you don't want shocks like that, particularly at the last minute. It sounds as if there's something quite extraordinary has happened. Of course, the effect of that was that the chief executive had to make a decision in fairly short shrift in order for the programme to continue without it necessarily going directly to full council at that time. That, of course, then prevented the overview and scrutiny from taking its normal function. And so we got into a bit of a mess, really. I think, you know, already Councillor Green has already outlined the remedial actions in terms of project management and to ensure that this doesn't, you know, that doesn't occur again, which was really good to hear. But of course, it does sort of beg the question why a council does not have maybe the necessary project management procedures in place in terms of, you know, the agreement of the original specification. What was the specification? Who agreed it? You know, how was that expenditure then monitored progressively during the life of the project? You know, if there was a make or buy decision, and in this case, it was a question of allowing another organisation to carry out the work. How was that scope of work agreed with that particular organisation, and how did the council monitor that organisation to an agreed specification? And on the face of it, none of that seemed to have happened. And that's why the questions were raised, and that's why we're looking at it today. And I think already Councillor Green has given the answers, because the aim is not to be critical about that per se. It's about making sure that we don't come across this sort of situation again, that we got confidence in our project management, and that, you know, if estimates are given, that they are realistic, and we can have confidence that, you know, the costs will be monitored and reported at an early stage if things are running awry. I mean, I know, for example, that, you know, the original estimate had a contingency for COVID in there. There was a 15% contingency, even within the original 500k budget. So there was some risk assessment done at that point. So I guess the burning question I've got now is, you know, is the budget now right? You know, is it going to cost any more? Are we going to be confronted with yet another big bill towards the end of the project? So I'd like to get some reassurance on that. And the other very specific question I've got is about the formal funding agreement. Now, if you're placing a contract with somebody to develop something, you have a formal funding agreement in place, which then define how much money is going to be available. But when I asked about this at the Children's Overview and Scrutiny Board, it hadn't been signed. And I thought the whole idea of having this agreement in place was to contain the costs. You know, and if it deviated from that, there'd be a process of allowing that to happen. So the second point I've got is, or question I've got is a formal funding agreement now been agreed. So one is, have we got enough money in the budget now? How's that funding been agreed and formally signed off? So there's two specific questions I've got there. There may be some others that come up during the debate. So I don't know, Councillor Green, if you wanted to lead off on those 2 points or hand it on. Thank you.
I'll have a go. If I can start. In terms of the assurance of have we got the budget right? Yes, that is our current understanding. The work that went on in the production of that cabinet paper for April was pretty extensive and quite robust and challenging. I believe there can be unexpected things, but clearly the closer you get to completion of the project, then the more certainty. And so I give you the assurance that I have, which is to the best of our knowledge at the moment. We believe that's the case, noting, as I say, that there has been some call on contingency. I will, if I may, defer to Mr. Reynolds in terms of the formal funding agreement with the academy. But to be clear, there is a council decision and cannot divert from that without going through the council process. There is also something which a colleague of mine in construction has explained to me about a type of essentially a type of contract which is in place. The payments are going through that I've set out and they require DCS sign off. But in terms of that technical part, if I may pass to Mr. Reynolds.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. The formal written agreement isn't yet in place. It's with our lawyers and the Academy's lawyers for sorting out some final details. My understanding is the final details concern the length of the lease. Everything else is a matter of agreement. But, Chair, I think you're quite right that in a proper process, you wouldn't be signing the formal agreement at this stage. But actually, that's the position we're in. The project was underway at the time when the increased costs were realised, and there wasn't an agreement then. The one sort of bit of good news around the muddle that this has been that I will hang on to is the fact that it is an extremely good project that is value for money and is what's needed to deliver, but the process for getting there has clearly been very far from ideal, which are the reasons for the changes in governance procedures that we've put in place so that this won't happen again. So there should be a legal agreement, there isn't, but my understanding is from our legal department that this is a matter of simply agreeing final details. It isn't anticipated that it's going to be extremely difficult. It's a matter of going through the process.
Thank you. I'll bring Councillor Hedges in first of all, if I may. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and I apologise to everybody and you, Chair, for actually physically being unable to get there. Been a very convoluted day, but I'm happy to be able to contribute at least something remotely if that's acceptable. Obviously, I concur with Councillor Green's observations concerning the previous project management. The Learning Centre, the new Longsby Academy satellite, is actually in my ward, in Councillor Phillips and myself's ward. We really only discovered this scheme was well advanced when we were told by the then BCP officer and the portfolio holder, Councillor Moore. We had a meeting and I'm more or less assured that this was just internal walls that were required. So obviously with the contingency amount that had to be agreed by the chief executive. It's fairly safe to assume it wasn't just internal walls, and the ever-present asbestos ogre raised its ugly head. I mean, to some degree, one observation I would make at this point would be, you know, how could the building condition be a surprise to us when we were actually the tenants for 20 years? But I'll leave that to building specialists to answer. As I say, ward councillors were not fully informed on the whole project, actually, and the way it was brought about, nor invited to visit, which I note, Chair, that you have visited, and very reassured by your observations on the quality and the provision there, which is exactly what we need, exactly what we're obliged to provide. And I'm very, very pleased, one, that it's in our ward, and two, that it is such a high spec, that now, once we can get all the project management aspects tidied away to everybody's satisfaction, that this project is, I understand the first 12 pupils are already in there, which obviously allowed for the fact that I couldn't observe any building work being done because it was finished and it was being occupied and used as a school. So this is where we all shout hurrah, I think. One observation, obviously, I do accept the fact that these places are very good value for money. I might observe that, you know, is that because we're not actually buying the land, has that skewed the general figure? But it is good to be reassured from many directions that the places are very good value for money. So just two ongoing questions, Chair, because I'm very greedy here. On the multi-use games area, the Mooga, I think we're still deliberating or trying to ascertain location and cost. I'd like to perhaps tease that out a little bit if it's possible this evening, and also the other aspect of the fencing, which I think I've seen the costing of that, and that does strike me as quite a large figure. But we're very proud the fact that BCP can offer this facility in the 3Ws ward, and the project is already running. So just await my invitation and Councillor Phillips's invitation to come and see what fabulous work has been done there so far. And I wish everybody involved with the project well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hedges. If you don't mind, could I ask my Councillor Cox to come in first, and we'll come back to the mugger and the fencing in a minute, if that's all right. Councillor Cox?
Yeah, it's just a note, and thanks for pointing out about the lack of a signature on the income, because actually that seems to be a bit of a pattern arising, insofar as only in the last few weeks in Christchurch that we've been asked to sign an agreement with the Town Council. BCP have asked the Town Council to sign an agreement for a period of work which ended in 31st of March. So we seem to have gone ahead and signed up for an SLA, which BCP didn't provide until about 4 months after the period had finished, which in my opinion is utterly unacceptable, not only from BCP's point of view, but also from the Town Council's perspective. But also on top of that, I've just found out that BCP workmen have walked out because they were advised by the BCP legal department that a signature hadn't been signed on an agreement with the Residents Association and the Town Council. And they've done that because I was told to quote, BCP eliminate risk. Well, if they eliminate risk on this one, why aren't they eliminate risk on that one? It does seem to be there's two sides to this story, depending on whichever they want to hear to be heard at the time. So, you know, there is a pattern here which I have extreme concerns about.
I think that this might be going a little bit beyond the Longspeed School specifically, but you're right, Councillor Cox. It is of concern, and we've already heard it agreed from Mr. Reynolds that in theory, you know, yes, you should have these things in place before you start, not wait to the end and then sign it. I think what I'll do is, in order to sort of get a feel for this, I will write to the 115 holder and ask what the process is or should be and if there are any other examples of where this is happening, and see if we can get a bit of feedback about this. And perhaps if you'd like to just let me know specifically what the project is, and I think that specific point, I think we can address in that way. If you're happy for me to do that, I'll just come back to you. And could I just, before we come on to Councillor Slade, I'd like to talk just a bit about the mugger. Location and cost. And I don't want to talk any figures because that's commercial in confidence information. So I don't want anybody to talk figures. This really is a bit of a mystery to me about the mugger because, you know, given the gestation of the project, the planning consent has only just been applied for. Yeah, the school is open. It's due to be fully open by, I think, September. Or August, or September, early September, and yet we've only just in the last week or so put in the planning application for the mugger, which I think is quite extraordinary, and again is reflective on the you know, the agreement of the specification for the project and its implementation, because I do know the mugger was included in part of the costings, the second costings. So the fencing, I did, just for Councillor Hedges' benefit, I did actually raise this with the project director about the cost of the fencing. I was assured that this came within reasonable bounds and had been competitively tendered. So I don't know, maybe Councillor Green would like to just add to that, but that was the information I was given, and I was fairly reassured by that. But if you could just comment on the issue surrounding the mugger, you know, why have we only just applied for planning consent? Yet this is apparently an essential part of the school, enable it to operate. Sorry. Okay, thank you, Councillor Green. If you could, I don't know if you can respond to that. If not, maybe Mr. Reynolds can. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I can certainly respond to it, and I'll do my best to answer it as well. Could I just deal with the specification for the fencing first of all, noting obviously the comments that you've already made about that. I would just ask members to remember that this is a special school. And that there are specifications which are necessary in a special school which might not always be required in a mainstream school. Clearly we want the best facilities for all our children, but there are some additional specifications required for a cohort. This is a unit which is looking after children with social, emotional and mental health issues and autistic spectrum condition as well, and therefore that may well add to the costs of providing some of those facilities, and likewise the cost of the mugger itself. In terms of why it is later, I would have to say that, you know, while the school will be open in September, I don't think there would have been that absolutely everything would have been completed. So quite what the sequencing was, I'm not sure I can speak to. But I know there has been quite a long pre-planning discussion between the architects and the planners about the siting of the mugger. There is some work which is has been required on trees and so on. So this is the continuation of a process. Clearly, it would be lovely to have absolutely everything open at the beginning of September, but I don't think we would necessarily have assumed that that was the case. Clearly, you know, things are moving on. The application, Chairman, actually, you can probably give greater clarity than I have. But it hasn't yet been registered. There are some further details which are required, I presume, to make sure that that's once that application is registered, it has as through the process, through the planning application as possible.
Okay, thank you. I'm just to follow through on I'm aware that the planning consent for the fence was submitted in a timely way, but some of the conditions of that planning consent are to retain the planting that's on the extra piece of land which has now been transferred, which does bring a big question mark over whether it is actually going to be possible to put a mugger into the space that's now currently available given the conditions that have been imposed by the approval of the planning consent for the fence. And it's not a question here. It's for the planning system. I understand that, but it does make you wonder why we had a planning consent in for the fence. We didn't actually have a planning consent for the change of use of the land at the same time to put the mugger in at the same point, given that that's the whole reason for getting that piece of ground. Before I move on, I don't know if you can answer that, Councillor Green, but or maybe Mr. Reynolds has got a comment you'd like to make on that.
Yes, Chair, I would say that it's not uncommon when there's an urgency to have something like special school provision to move ahead as quickly as possible with the elements of planning that allow you to open the provision while the more difficult issues can be resolved at a later date. And I think the mugger has fallen into that category. If we had if the council waited until every issue was resolved, the provision wouldn't yet be opened, and the urgency was the demand for places for children and young people in special school provision who otherwise would have to be placed in independent or non-maintained schools outside of the council area, and that's the balance of what the priorities are, I think.
Okay, Councillor Slade.
Thank you. It's quite simple to me in that I think we all are really supportive of this scheme. I think it's exactly the sorts of scheme we should be doing, and we should be doing across the area, and giving our children the opportunity to be educated as close to home and in good facilities. There's no doubt about that at all, and there's absolutely no criticism of the decision to do all of this. I think my reflection on watching this unfold and listening to the responses is how robust going forward is project management for schemes in children's, but more widely. I mean, I was keen that we looked at this as an example of project management being less than great, because I can't imagine how frustrating it must be to be the sort of frontline people who are expecting this to happen, to suddenly see everything move about, and to have to deal with the pressures of the budget all over the place. So going forward on the next scheme and the next scheme that we work with, have we now got a system in place whereby there are gateways to pass through, there are people externally who are checking this? Do we have, as a council, now have a sort of an exterior check on this, so that we don't have to ask you to come back? Because I don't want for anyone to think this is because we don't 100% support this scheme.
Shall I respond to that?
Yes, please, thank you.
In terms of the programme management, yes, I think we have got the right structure now. Clearly, a structure is a structure until it's tested. But there is a great deal more transparency in this structure than there has been in the. This is, I think, probably something that you would have seen sooner. But we now have those rights, and through this process, there are people on the ground, there are people who are running schools, there are council officers, and there is member scrutiny. We've got the 151 officer, the chief executive, and I did draw attention to the fact that we've got the chair of the schools forum there as well. In addition, there is a paper which is due to come to, I think it's on the 4th of October, which will be around capital investment in schools, and at that point I think there will be a review. There's an opportunity for a review and for exactly those questions to be asked and answered within the context of a bit more time having passed, because it has taken a long time to draw all this together. It's taken Scrutiny a long time to be able to to get to look at this, and there has work which has been required to make sure that the Schools Capital Programme Board has the information that it believes it needs. It is supplied with good information, and it will be accountable for that going through that process and ultimately to council. So I think those mechanisms are there. I think they're robust. But as with everything, you have to drive it, don't you, to see if it works. So, you know, things have come up. We now have a really clear in one place understanding of the capital available, because while this process, this paper, you will note, originally proposed using basic need grant funding, we've had some subsequent allocations of funding for special needs provision, which might be the better source of the fund for this, because basic need is our most flexible pot to improve school conditions and provide school places. So those sort of things are happening and changing along the way. And we've also had some more work done on the needs and the types of provision, because it can be very tempting just to build something because you think it's what you need. You've got to go back and ask yourself, actually, what if that is where the drive for places are. So we now know where the children are, what their needs are, and what their provision is likely to require. In addition, there is £10 million that council authorised to invest in special educational needs and disabilities provision in February, and the governance process which I've set out will clearly look at how that money is spent, and value for money and bang for your buck is one of those things that will be the right questions to be asking through that process. So there will be a paper which sums up this broader strategy, and as I said, through the quarterly medium-term financial plan updates, it will be clear in there as well, alongside the high needs block itself as a revenue stream. I hope that's addressed your questions, Councillor. So I've done my best not just to go on endlessly about them.
No,
but
that's really helpful.
What you're asking.
Yeah, it is really helpful. I'm just wondering whether there is whether we should be considering whether, as a council, there is a blueprint for capital projects. You know, obviously you've done a brilliant example of how it's working in children's, but there must be a lot of synergy between a capital project in communities as there is in children's. It obviously are different funding streams, but in terms of the processes that this council should be going through to make sure that it is robust, it's transparent, it's fair, it's good value for money. And I'm not sure, and I'm not saying that it's you have no responsibility in answering that. I'm not sure that I know as a member whether we do have that, and how we can assure ourselves as members that there is something similar. And I think that would be a benefit to us. I don't know whether I might be so bold as to ask the chair if he might send an email to somebody to find out.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Councillor Slade, and it's. Sorry, Councillor Green, do you want to come back?
Sorry, I was just going to say, you're quite right. I can speak to what's going on in children's services, and if you know, that's entirely within your remit as an overview and scrutiny board to take whatever work forward you think would be appropriate. So, be very happy.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I think what again, as we were very happy with what the outcome of this project is going to deliver. And I think anyone who's been involved in it have seen it's really going to be a tremendous benefit to the children that will attend the school, and it's a cost-effective way of doing it. And I think the questions that have come out of this are all about project management systems that the council are using, and that's really why it's back in front of us today. And I think what I will do is with the chairs is go away and see how we might use, not an example, just to let it feed into a broader look at project management in general across the council, and how we do it, how we implement projects, what our project management processes are, how they're communicated to the rest of the organisation, what tools they've got for running projects, what visibility there is of projects to members, for example, and I think that there is a bigger piece of work there that I think that we need to do. I would just like to touch very briefly on some of the democratic issues, which I think are lessons out of this project, and they, for me, they come out in the report in paragraph 10 and 12, where it talks about, as part of addressing the lack of special places locally, initial funding of 500k was agreed, and then it talks about an initial programme or to deliver both phases of 1 and 2 phases of the project. Well, the initial paper actually it said nothing about initial funding at all. It was the project that it was going to cost 500k, and there was 15% contingency in it. There was also no mention of 2 phases. So I felt that this paper actually was really sort of being a bit disingenuous to a point, in that the wording used was just deliberately misleading in a way. And I only offered it as a comment because I felt, you know, how can you say it was initial when there was no intention of it being initial funding initially? That's what it was, you know, and yet, you know, the wording doesn't quite reflect it. It's almost as if it was always going to have another set of funding, or it's always going to have another phase of the project. That was not the statement in the first paper that was approved by council. So I think it was inappropriate to start badging it in that way on that in that subsequent paper. So having said that, members, has anybody else got anything they'd like to add to this particular discussion? Councillor Burton, did you want to come back in at all? I see you're up there on the screen. I don't know if you wanted to speak.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, Chair, I'll be.
Yeah, of course.
A couple of observations, really, and a small question. With a few regrets, as it were, because I don't want to go over lots of things that have been said already, because the debate's been quite interesting. I too went to visit the school, but I went to visit when it was actually children were there, rather than to watch the building work, although I did see some building work. And I spoke to a number of children and the teachers there, and I would echo what has been said. It is a great place. I spoke to some children who hadn't been in education for quite a while, and were thriving in the new place. My regret is that the process has hidden what is a very good news story. My feeling is that at the beginning, if the budget had been put how it actually ended up, it would have still gone through the process, and it would still been looked on as a good value, which it is. There's children there, say, who haven't been in education. The children who are travelling a lot shorter journey, a lot wasting their time in taxis in the morning going out of the area. That there are children who would be being educated at a much higher expense, not in BCP. So my regret is, and how can we stop this happening again, is that this is a good news story for these children, which has been buried due to the discussion on the finance, which is the same, my comment and my regret, really.
Okay, well, I think that's ended the debate on an upbeat note. Yes, we recognise this is a brilliant project for our children, and we look forward to it being fully opened, and hopefully Councillor Hedges will get an invite to go and have a look round, and I'm sure he will absolutely think it's fabulous.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, so with that, members, I'll close that debate. Thank you, Mr. Reynolds, for attending this evening. Thank you, Councillor Green, for presenting the paper. Thank you.
Thanks. Good night.
Which now brings us on to agenda item 6, scrutiny of homes-related cabinet reports. We've all read the report, I assume, and I'll call on Councillor Bob Lawton, portfolio holder of homes, to present the report. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Chairman, and welcome, and good evening to everybody. This report, which is just asking the council or permission, which goes through cabinet to go out to consultation, presents a really exciting opportunity for council housing in the BCP area. We have approximately 10,000 houses across Bournemouth and Poole, and in the context of council housing being high on the national agenda after the tragedy of Grenfell 4 years ago, It is really important that we get this decision, and whatever we do, we get it correct. Council housing in the Bournemouth neighbourhood is managed in-house by the officers. The Pool Housing Partnership, which is an arm's length management organisation, or the nickname of an ALMO, is run by Pool Housing Association. Can I just say before we go any further that the paper that we have before us today is not any criticism in any shape or form of any way that the council organisations are being run in Bournemouth or Poole. The paper doesn't apply to Christcrch, as they some years ago outsourced their housing stock to Sovereign. The other part of the mix is the national context. The government have published a white paper on and with certain stipulations on how we organise and run council properties. Some of the main points which I just quickly read out to the group is to be safe in your own home, to know how your landlord is performing, to have your complaints dealt with properly and fairly, to be treated with respect, to have your voice heard by your landlord, to have a good home, quality home and a neighbourhood to live in, and to be supported to take your first steps to ownership. The other point that I should also finally make, Chairman, is that when ALMOs were set up, and I think it was set up in Poole in 2002, there were approximately just over 70 ALMOs up and down the country. There's now around about 27, as councils up and down the country are bringing their ALMOs back in-house. This paper is asking for permission and laying out that we wish to go out to consultation, a really comprehensive consultation on the options which are available to us. But the also major point which we're asking residents in Bournemouth and Poole is what do they want from the council in how we run their council housing stock in terms of maintenance, rent, all of those options which we want them to give their opinion on. I will leave it there, Chairman, and take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lawton. Members. Councillor Fear.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Councillor Lawton. Going through this paper, I think it's great. I'm really excited about this consultation, and putting the residents at the heart of it in asking what they would like to see going forward is definitely the best way to do this. So all I can really say is best of luck, and I know you're as eager to get on with it as the rest of us, and I'm really looking forward to the findings, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fear. Anybody else? Yeah. Oh, Councillor Howell.
Yes, thanks, Councillor Lawton. Can I just write at I think it's pretty much the last page of the report in table 2. I think it's appendix 1, table 2. It says advantages and disadvantages of a combined company model or an in-house model, but it only lists the advantages. So what are the disadvantages, and why haven't they been included in the report so we can make a proper judgment?
The major disadvantage is, sorry, Chairman, is that okay if I answer?
Yeah, please do. Sorry, Councillor Lawton.
Yeah, the major disadvantage is that we don't want it, and I think you would probably agree with this. We don't want it to be seen as a Bournemouth takeover or a Poole takeover of the housing stock. That is our main disadvantage. But also, the main reason we're looking at this, we had an independent report which has recommended that we bring the services together. And remember, we have 2 HRAs, which is really fundamentally difficult when we should really have 1 HRA covering the whole area. The main advantages of doing this is that it allows us to build a completely new service model, which will be of benefit to the residents of Bournemouth, Poole and Christcrch. The disadvantage, as I say, I don't want us to be accused of either of us, either a Bournemouth councillor or a Poole councillor, of taking over the other.
Yes, thank you. But that answer relates to table 1, which where the disadvantages are listed. Table 2 is not about the issue of favouring one of the existing models or not. It accepts that we'd have a new model, but it compares a combined company model with an in-house model. And as I say, it says that there's a table there with disadvantages, but no disadvantages are listed. I would say that, for example, one disadvantage of an in-house model is the tendency for officers to get pulled into other responsibilities and for budgets to get mixed or compromised more easily. So those are the kind of things that I would have expected to be included in a list of disadvantages, but there is no list.
Can I quickly just answer that, and then I'll ask Lorraine Means to come in, Chairman.
Yeah, please go ahead.
The disadvantages are the flip side of almost of the advantages. And I do take your point about officers being excuse me, I'm losing my voice, about officers being sucked into various other things. I think that is unlikely. It's a possibility, but it's something we should certainly be aware of. And certainly, as while I'm portfolio holder, it certainly won't happen. But I'll just ask quickly Lorraine to just quickly jump in as well, please.
Yes, hi there, no problem at all. Yeah, in terms of the way it's presented, it probably is a little bit confusing in terms of the disadvantages aren't presented as such, but it is the advantages of one model and the disadvantage of the other. So they kind of they're in terms of the additional disadvantages of the various models. That's really what we want to get under the skin of over the next 3, 4, 5 months. Do the due diligence. I think this table presented in table 2 was the main, what the group considered to be the main issues that we needed to consider in terms of the advantages. But you're correct, Councillor Howe, there are many detailed pros and cons beyond the list that we've got here as the appendix. And I think that's the discussion we want to have over the next couple of months. Thank you.
Can I just finish off?
Yes, please do.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to say that the advantages are the reverse, but that's not the case, because the advantage of the reverse point of that I just stated there isn't included as an advantage for option 2C. But I'll cease there. Thank you.
Chairman, I think Kate Ryan.
Yes, I've just got the message. Kate Ryan wanted to come in. Thank you, Kate. You're muted, Kate.
Are you plugged in?
Can't hear you.
Sorry.
That's it. I can hear you now.
Okay, sorry. I must have pulled out my mic. Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it is a good point. And when we did the original business case, we did have the pros and cons for all the models that would have been shared with the councillor working group and discussed at length. But just to pick up on Councillor Howell's point, I think one of the findings sort of nationally about this is that one of the disadvantages of an in-house model is it's similar to what you were saying about officers, but actually sometimes the focus of the whole council can be distracted and not focused enough on the housing management. So in terms of overview, scrutiny and guiding the business, it's recommended that you would then have some kind of advisory board or panel that makes sure that you do keep that focus specifically on the issues that matter to residents, and that's why that's part of the proposal going forwards, because otherwise I think you're right, it can get a bit lost just within broader cabinet and council business.
Thank you, Kate. Councillor Cox wanted to come in. Thank you.
Thanks. I wasn't really going to speak on this because it's got nothing to do with Christchurch, it appears. But I can't help but think, well, part of my question is, does it have anything to do with Christchurch? Or will it have anything to do with Christchurch in the future? Because, you know, if it does, then I'd be more interested in it. And then it led me on to thinking, well, hang on a minute, what about the strategy? What is our strategy going forward for housing, you know, for public housing? And maybe we're doing something doing this first, and whereas we should be looking at what strategy we want in the future. before we go on to the consultation. Because if we don't know what our overall strategy is going to be, what are we doing? Why are we doing this consultation? Because things may change. Does that make sense?
Do you want to come in, Councillor Lawton?
Yeah, I'll quickly. Yeah.
Well, what I will say though, just before you answer, I think we've got a housing acquisition paper coming forward at some point. Maybe Lorraine Mealing's like to talk about that at some point, but go ahead, please, Bob.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. It doesn't affect Christchurch. You're right, Councillor Cox. It doesn't affect Christchurch. It'll only affect Christchurch if we build there, if we build council houses there. But at the moment, there are no plans that I'm aware of that any major schemes for the Christchurch area. But going forward, how does it fit in with the overall strategy? The overall strategy that we have is to build council houses and to deliver excellent service, excellent council houses, which meet climate change objectives and are of good quality, and we treat our residents with fairness and the regular stuff that you would normally expect us to do. So although that's a broad picture, that I think is in general terms. We do have a housing strategy paper coming out soon anyway, so you'll be able to read that. Thank you.
Did you want to come in, Lorraine?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, just building on Councillor Lawton's point really about the new build aspirations. So we have got a council new build and acquisition strategy coming forward in September Cabinet, and within that we know that as an area we've got challenging housing targets, and part of our strategy is obviously work with private developers, etc., to bring all those much needed homes forward, but also to directly deliver some of those homes ourselves. So part of the strategy that will come in September will be about how we might make best to build new affordable housing, new council housing, and it's quite conceivable that some of that properties built in the Christchurch area, and in terms of the ex-council housing that is currently managed and owned by a housing association, sovereign housing association. But if we build on sites and build affordable housing in Christchurch, then that will be part of the stock as well. 1,000 that we've got in Bournemouth and Poole.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Are you okay with it?
No, that's fine. Thank you very much. It was, and thank you very much, Councillor Lawton, for your explanation of the strategy. But I just think that that probably needs to be front and centre of any consultation to explain to people what the strategy is, and then say this is the consultation. I just think it's you need to be banging that particular drum more loudly, shall I say?
Well, can I just thank you, Councillor Cox, for your helpful remarks, which I really appreciate. The difficulty we have is obviously you end up being consulted out if you're not careful, and this is a binary choice, if you like. It's not a ballot, it's a binary choice. You know, this is the options which are available to us, and we'd like the residents' opinion on it. And we have a preferred option, which is within the paper, but we will be chatting to people and see what let's see what the consultation returns for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lawton. I thought you were going to put your hand up, Councillor Dedman.
Well, I was only looking at you in a puzzled way because, well, or indeed trying to address Councillor Lawton. Do I understand then that Christchurch residents won't be consulted, although in fact if you build council houses in Christchurch in the future, it will involve us, or will they have to go to sovereign? I'm not sure of the connotations.
Councillor Lawton.
The consultation which we're doing is primarily for Poole and Bournemouth. If we build, and it is a big if we build in Christchurch in the future, and that could be some years off if we ever actually do that, yes, any option or method or a strategy which we adopt will be applied within the council Christchurch area. But at the present time, I can assure Councillor Dedman that is highly unlikely.
Okay. Councillor Slade.
Thank you. I'm sorry to labour the point, but if the housing needs assessment says that we need new affordable homes in Christchurch, why are you so adamant that we're very unlikely to build them? Because I would have thought that if we want to build homes and we have a right to build homes across the whole of BCP, whilst I totally understand that the consultation, current tenants, it's not relevant, and those people need to be really consulted with because it's going to be a change for them. I'm really struggling to understand why, if this is our BCP strategy going forward, which means if we built in the future, it would apply anywhere in BCP, why we aren't actively promoting the fact that if we build in Christchurch, this is just as relevant to Christchurch. And why aren't we proactively looking to build there? And just, you said about being, it's a binary choice and we have a preferred option. That sort of sounds quite like almost predetermination. I'm assuming you're not consulting on 2A and 2B, only on 2C and 2D. But the fact that you've got a very long list of advantages, a very short list of the advantages, does look slightly leading. I have to say, from my reading of it, I would rather go for 2D, but it doesn't feel quite fair. We might lose our electrics in a minute.
Yeah. I don't know if you can see what's going on in the room, everybody watching, but the lights are flickering and it's the most peculiar sensation when it's happening. But Lorraine, you've wanted to speak, so I'll invite you to speak. But I think we've got to be a little careful about this debate, not to go outside of the remit of what the paper's intended to do. You know, we've got two ways of managing the houses at the moment for those where we do have council housing, and you've got to make a choice on how it's going to be managed in the future. And but anyway, let me. Lorraine wanted to speak on it first. Please, Lorraine, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thanks for bringing me in. Just a couple of comments. Obviously, it's a very complex project, as we're realising as part of the discussion. In terms of the Christchurch dynamic, the one thing that I would add is in terms of perspective, never say never. We don't know. We've got really unmet housing needs across the whole of the BCP area. So we're going through the process of looking at sites and what they can develop for us across the whole BCP geography. But in terms of how this particular paper might impact on residents, obviously, as Councillor Lawton said, the primary focus of the consultation that we're talking about here is the existing tenants, of which there are around 10,000, but there will also be a consultation which is touched on in the paper with wider stakeholders, and some of those wider stakeholders will be people that are on our housing register waiting to be our tenants of the future, which is likely to include Christchurch residents, as it will to make that point about that wider consultation. In its view of what we're consulting on, we did take the view that it would be helpful to focus the discussions by consulting on a specific recommended model that the Councillor Working Group worked through. But I think the due diligence that we've got to do over the next months will unpack that, will identify additional advantages, disadvantages, issues, implications of that model as well as models. So we don't want to really tighten down that debate, but the focus of the consultation will be on this and challenge it. So hopefully that's helpful context. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine. Councillor Howell.
Yeah, with regard to table 2, again, it says no with regard to option 2D, no additional company overhead costs would be incurred. So does that mean that people who work for PHP, well, I suppose either way, when you've got a consolidation of there are going to be people in PHP, people in the council on differing salaries, and therefore some people are they're going to be roughly doing the same job, some people are going to be paid less than others. Are you envisaging that people's salaries are going to be managed down to the lowest common denominator? And then that opens up a wider issue of on some services like Tricuro, we outsource, and one of the subtexts of that outsourcing is to get a cheaper supply of labour. I'm not saying I agree with that, but I imagine that some people in Tricuro would be a bit upset if they see that people in housing are on a better deal because they've been kept within the council. it opens up a whole kind of raft of ethical problems, I think.
Councillor Lawton.
I understand the point that Mark is making. I don't agree with it, but I understand entirely where he's coming from. I think there will be some synergies available to us, but I can tell him now that the synergies aren't that we will always pay less than before. But those sort of things are normally, as you're all aware, handled by our HR department. I, as a council, would not normally be involved within those discussions, but I can assure him that we're not in the job, or not in the market for going for the lowest denominator.
I just say by definition, then that part of the paper is incorrect, because if you don't go for the lowest common denominator, chances are you're going to increase overhead costs, aren't you? That might be a bit binary, that statement, but you know, there's definitely an issue there, I think.
Lorraine Millings, you wanted to come back in on that again?
Sorry, thank you, Chairman. Just a bit of clarity in terms of that particular point with reference to company. It was actually referring to the additional cost of running a company, so auditors' fees, company secretary, the staffing resource required to client, the arrangement between the council and a wholly owned company. It was that in terms of overhead costs. So that was what that particular section was referring to. But in terms of staff costs, Councillor Lawton is absolutely right. There will be employment rights, obviously HR, TUPE rights, etc. So whether we go, you know, wherever the staff turn into, whichever staff move into, there will be employment rights and pay protection, etc., as there usually would be.
Thank you, Lorraine. Are there any more members? Because it does seem like we've probably got to the end of this debate now, and I'm not hearing any howls of anguish regarding the recommendations that are in the paper, and I think what we can see is that effectively the paper is supported by the Overview and Scrutiny Board. So in overall terms, I think, well, with the odd exception of a bit of tiny detail, which I hope he doesn't need to.
Well, I'd just like it recorded that I don't agree with that, because I don't think, in relation to the choice between an outside body and in-house, that the case has been made. Thanks.
That's fine. I think we can record that. Anyone else wish to dissent? Okay. Thank you very much, Councillor Lawton. Thank you, Lorraine. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Cheers.
Bye.
So now we go on to agenda item 7, the scrutiny of finance and transformation related cabinet reports. To consider the 2021 end of year performance report, which will be introduced by our leader of the council, Councillor Drew Mellor. Thank you very much, Drew. Good evening.
Good evening, Chairman, and thank you for inviting me. Okay, so this is the Q4 performance report, so the end of year performance report for the 2021 corporate strategy. You see it's got 2 appendices. One is the performance dashboard, so very useful in terms of understanding how the performance are against each of the objectives on the corporate strategy. Appendix 2 is the exception strategy, exception reports, so we can see where we're materially underneath the target. Overarchingly, I'd say it's really strong performance. There are 8 exception reports. Quite a lot of them relate to the last 12 months that we've had in terms of COVID. I will just draw committee's attention to recommendation C, and that's about how we build these reports up in the future. So anything that the committee would like to see added, be really welcome any feedback. So Chair, I'll probably leave it there and welcome any questions. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Leader. Members. Well, Leader, things have gone very quiet. We've had to turn the lights off in here because I think we're hypnotising ourselves. Councillor Slade wishes to speak. Thank you, Councillor Slade.
Thank you. I mean, it clearly is very difficult to to assess performance when you live through a pandemic. Obviously, and some of the figures are going to be, you know, in strange places, which I think we have to accept, and we always have to sort of, you know, just caveat everything with we've been through a pandemic. I've got a couple of questions on the paper, just so I understand it better. In terms of the waste figures, are they cumulative? And there's another section of it later on that I'm wondering if it whether some of these figures, when everything is in terms of weight and things, or numbers of things, I'm assuming they must be cumulative because they get much bigger. So, for example, the number of cases of antisocial behaviour was one of them, which I'm assuming gets bigger, and the other one is the quantity of waste. If they are cumulative, for people who struggle with that, it might be really a lot easier to actually look at it quarter by quarter, so that you haven't got to get a calculator out to figure out what the actual figures were for each period of time. So yeah, that's my first reflection, just to make it easier for the public to understand. And in terms of the numbers, I've made the assumption of them being cumulative. The numbers of antisocial behaviour cases, obviously they're all in the red. They're obviously much higher than you'd like them to be, but they aren't going in the right direction. And if you look at the waste similarly, assuming they're cumulative, they're certainly not getting better. And I would like to have thought that unless our waste is going in a downward direction, would we not consider that to be an amber rather than a green? Does that make sense? Have I explained myself?
Okay, is that it? That's the 2 points there, please, Leader.
Yeah, thank you. So I believe the figures Councillor Slade is talking about are cumulative. Not all the figures in there are cumulative, because effectively things like do we have 9 beaches with with green flags? But that's a base number. But yeah, so they are quarterly cumulative. What I would say is I would actually welcome anybody who's interested in a brief one-off separate session to actually look through this and make sure we're all comfortable how usable this data is. That's a fair point, and there may be other ways, if we spend some genuine time looking at it, that we can improve them. So very happy to facilitate that at any point if anybody is interested in doing that. I think I made a similar point at the last time we presented this. Then I do apologise, Chair, I've forgotten what the second point was. The second question was
antisocial behaviour.
Yeah, fine. So it's not a quantitative decision about the RAG rating. So that will be based on a certain set of criteria. If it is green, it will be because that is in effectively the criteria for green. Whether those criteria should be changed, I guess it's to the extent of how effectively what effective targets we set ourselves and benchmarks. I know ASB in particular does include many figures including COVID, so is really quite distorted. But again, very happy to if anybody who wants to come in who's more closer to that figure and give any more detail.
Councillor Slade.
Sorry, can I just ask one more thing? Just because I think it's useful. I haven't noticed these performance figures on the agenda for the Children's Overview and Scrutiny Board, and I just wondered whether it makes more sense for this to come to all 3 boards, for us to look at the generic ones and the overall ones, because it's not really fair of us to start challenging a whole list of children's related performance markers when that's really the job of Children's ONS, but it's not on their agenda for this month. And I've specifically ignored those ones because I didn't feel it was appropriate for me to really challenge you when it's somebody else. So it's just a reflection, really.
I probably could comment on that myself, Leader, in that, as this board is have an overall responsibility for the overview and scrutiny function. We can take that up with the chairs of the other overview and scrutiny committees, I think, because they may wish to review those elements of that report in the future. I mean, for what it's worth, I actually like this report a lot because it's not millions of words and it's actually some nice pretty colours that I can look at easily and then see a very succinct exceptions report, which is ideal. Is exactly what you need in terms of reporting. So I really like this approach. Anybody else, members? Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I welcome it as well. I think it's a really good step forward, this kind of presentation of performance. And I've kind of got similar comments from Councillor Slade, and I just wanted to know there's a in particular in quarter 1s and 2s, there's a lot of greyed out blocks, and I just assumed that was to do with the pandemic, and we didn't have the information there in those quarters. So I'd just like you to confirm that, and actually, if I'd be quite happy to participate in any review of whether they're useful or not, because there's a very large number there. The communications number of website views I thought was particularly useless in terms of the number. Do we really need to know that the huge number that have visited the website? I don't know. It's not particularly useful to me. But I'd just like to comment that it's a good start, but I think it needs to be clearer and it needs to be more consistent. But hopefully that will come in time.
Okay, Leader. I mean, the specific question about the blanked out or greyed out blocks.
Yeah, okay, so a couple of things, Chair, and thank you for the question. Often data is only available annually or less frequently in some cases. In terms of specifics, the light grey is there's no RAG rate set as yet, and the dark grey means we have no data. So that might help. Apologies, we could have made that clearer in terms of the in terms of the key, perhaps. What I will do, Chair, is I will take responsibility for setting up a meeting within the next month for myself and Councillor Cox, because he said he'd be interested in it, our team, and anybody who would be interested in joining us. I think it would just be worth having that outside of this meeting, a proper dive, just to add some value, add some colour to it effectively. I think that would be useful. Can I just briefly respond to Councillor Slade's point around the children's services effectively? I actually don't disagree. I think there's something strong in this committee taking responsibility for this paper, but am I best placed to answer all the questions in it? I certainly have a reasonably clear understanding of most, but if the children's services wanted to carve out parts of this and take a specific children's focus, as in adults and health, I think that'd be useful. I like one place having ownership of it, but there's really good data in here that I think the children and health scrutiny committees could use as well. So I certainly would support that if those chairs would like to find a way of carving that data out, Chair.
Thank you, Leader. So we've got the chair of the Adults Health and Overview Scrutiny meeting here. You happy with that? Yeah, cheers. Thank you. Councillor Howell.
Yes, thank you. My question relates to the last exception report, percentage of employees completing mandatory training, which was very, very low in the last time we looked at this, and is still very low at 19% when the target is 100%. Now, in the summary financial implications, it makes clear that the consequences of a lack of training might be financially very significant, running to hundreds of thousands of pounds for single incidents. But in the first paragraph, reason for level of performance, says the main reason for the performance level will be the time and capacity that colleagues have to complete the modules, i.e. that people are too busy with their day-to-day tasks to find time to be able to complete training. Although that's the main reason, at the end of the paper, it's action taken or plan to improve performance. None of those items relate to that main reason, which is lack of capacity. So we have a fundamental issue here that too many people in the organisation don't feel able to carry out training, mandatory training, because of their other commitments. So I wonder how the leader proposes to solve that. Thank you.
Leader?
Yeah, so we have introduced a new push on mandatory training and a monthly review with detailed info going into all service directors and C&B on who has not completed which courses. There is a focused approach led by HR on this, and that we are promoting a training topic each month. Look, Chair, let's be honest. There is more we can and should be doing to free up staff to do this, especially new starters. We have been in the most crazy of years, both in terms of the safe landing of the council, and then in terms of the pandemic. You see, and also the text in this report effectively says how we do think this is improving at pace, and we are pushing to deliver this in the next year effectively. So I think we're doing a lot of the right things on it. We're well behind the curve. We're committed to getting there. I'm assured when I had a briefing on this paper, effectively that there is significant challenge, coming through CMB on all aspects of this. So I personally take heart that we're moving forward. There is a lot going on. There's an awful lot more to do, and I hope the committee can take some comfort in that, and look forward to seeing the Q1 next year improve again.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you. Councillor Howes?
Yes, well, I mean, we wait for the next report, don't we? That's the nature of this particular process. Thank you.
Okay, any more members? Leader, did you want to come back to me again?
Chair, thank you. If we have no more questions on this paper, Chair, then I might just briefly.
Yeah, I think we've finished on this paper now. Yes, so please carry on, Leader.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to take the opportunity, and I'm sure committee, would agree with me. We've had a hugely busy weekend, and our teams have stood up to that fantastically, led by Sophie Ricketts, and also our wider partners. So I just wanted to have the opportunity to place on record my thanks, Chair, for the significant efforts that they've done over the weekend. And we know we're at the start again of a busy summer, but we really do appreciate what our teams are doing, exceptional hours in some cases, and also that of our partners, Chair. So I just wanted to thank you very much for indulging me and having the capacity to say that. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. I'm sure we'll all join in supporting you with that, and we know how hard they've been working down there in very, very hot weather, as we have this afternoon too. I think we're all getting a bit weary now. Anyway, thank you, leaders, and that draws agenda item 7 to a close. So we've just got agenda item 8, future meeting dates, which are listed there. And I think, members, that now brings us to the end of the meeting. So thank you very much. If you could stop the live stream now, please, Max. Thank you.